I'm going to rank every mainline Mario game in my opinion, and in last place at number 23 is Super Mario Run. This game takes the most fundamental thing about Mario, which is movement, and makes it automatic, which is roughly like making a driving game where the car steers itself. Mario runs forward on his own, you short tap for a small hop, hold it for more air, and you can chain wall jumps or mid-air spins with decent timing. The black coin tiers are where the only real skill ceiling shows up, demanding near perfect routes with almost no margin, and going for those is probably the most engaged I felt with this game, which is not the best endorsement of this, given that it describes about 20 minutes of my life, and these were also extremely frustrating at the same time. But here's what Super Mario Run seems to fundamentally misunderstand. Half of the joy of Mario is in the choice to stop, to stand at the edge of a platform and look around, to go back for something you spotted 3 screens ago, or have really any sort of strategy with your movement. That's just completely gone here. The game is always moving and your only job is to react to it. Even branching paths aren't real decisions, they're just the setup for your next attempt once you've memorized the correct tap sequence. Now there are games where this works, there's plenty of fun games like Temple Run, Subway Surfers, Jetpack Joyride, where you're automatically moving, but I didn't really care for it much in a Mario game. Now it is a polished game, it runs perfectly fine, but after like 40 minutes the novelty wears off, and there's nothing holding you there unless you're the type who finds a coin counter going up motivating, and in that case you already have New Super Mario Bros. 2. Also, this game came out in 2016 and cost $10 for the full experience. For a mobile game back then, you might as well have asked $100. Before I get into the next game, I'm just going to explain this ranking a little more. So I made a ranking last year, but I replayed some games and changed some opinions, plus I want to go a little more in detail and add another game to this list. Keep in mind, this is just mainline Mario games, no RPGs, no Mario Kart, just mainline Mario platformers. And I have rankings of those other series if you want to check them out after. Number 22, Super Mario Land. I could just never get into Super Mario Land. A lot of people like this game, but it's never really stood out to me. Mario floats a little too long in this, the movement just feels off. It just feels like you're playing this game with oven mitts sometimes. The levels reflect what the Game Boy could actually do in 1989, and that's fair enough, but the design doesn't compensate for the hardware's limits the way the best constrained games do. Compare it to World 1-1 of the original Super Mario Bros., a level that teaches you almost everything you need to know about the game, and still feels really good to control. This game doesn't exactly do that because there is some more variety here, and I will get to that, but that doesn't necessarily make it a better game. Another thing I want to say is that a lot of people like to use the for its time argument, which I did cover in this video. Anyway, the submarine and plane sections are the most memorable parts, and also the weirdest. Dropping you into a horizontal shooter that has nothing to do with anything else in the game, or really the series. The Koopas here explode instead of leaving shells. Goombas are replaced with these things. There's a boss called Hio-Hoi, if I'm pronouncing that right, and he just throws rocks at you. The whole thing feels like someone trying to figure out what Mario even means on hardware it was never really designed for, which is historically interesting, but not particularly satisfying to play. Every other game on this list does at least one thing better than Land does anything really, which is why it's here. It's just very simple compared to almost every other game, feels the worst to control, probably has the worst soundtrack, even though I will say that there are quite a few bangers here. It is very much a product of its time and we can appreciate it for that, but unless you grew up with this game, it's hard for me to recommend it unless you're a huge Mario fan. Number 21, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. The Lost Levels is Super Mario Bros. With the difficulty cranked up to 11. Same physics, same controls, same everything on the surface with slightly better details on the ground, but the level design has completely changed. It's not trying to challenge you in interesting ways, but it's just trying to make you throw your controller. Poison mushrooms placed exactly where you'd instinctively reach for a power-up, warp zones that send you backwards through the game, blind jumps over pits with wind that feels like guessing. The original Super Mario Bros. Had a good difficulty curve where it taught you the rules and then tested your mastery of them. Lost Levels just assumes you know the rules and spends its entire runtime exploiting that knowledge against you. The movement in the original has a slipperiness to it when you're building speed, and that was fine because the levels were built around it. Here, that same movement gets applied to platforming tight enough that being slightly off means falling, and certain stages have wind that pushes your jump sideways in ways you can't fully account for. You technically can improve with the wind sections, but it feels more like guesswork. There are stretches where clearing something after 10 attempts feels earned, but they're outnumbered by the ones that feel less like a test of skill and more like a test of how long you're willing to just sit down. Most people who do defend this game just use get good as their only argument, so there is that, I guess. Number 20, Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. So Land 2 fixes almost everything wrong with the first game, and the difference is extremely obvious the second you start moving. Mario has actual weight, the controls respond how you expect, you get a world map that lets you pick the order of the zones instead of being pushed through a corridor, which immediately makes it feel closer to Super Mario Bros. 3 in structure. There's agency here in a way the original Land just never offered, and it was pretty impressive for the Game Boy hardware. The zones themselves are worth talking about specifically, but they're surprisingly imaginative for a Game Boy game in 1992. The macro zone is set inside a giant house where you're the size of a mouse navigating between electrical outlets and bathtubs. One of the stranger premises in any Mario game. The space zone puts you on small planetoids where your jumps carry much further than expected. There's a Halloween pumpkin zone, a zone inside a turtle-shaped ship, a zone in a tree full of insects. Each one is very distinct, and the fact that this was on the Game Boy actually is really impressive. It also introduces Wario, who at this point is just a large, angry final boss, but already has more personality in a single encounter than the first game's entire cast managed across every level combined.
Obey me. am your master.
What holds Land 2 back, the reason it sits at 20 rather than higher, is that the levels are too short for their mechanics to develop into anything really, and it is still a very simple game even though it has some cool themes. Now, simple doesn't necessarily make it bad or anything, but just like with Land, it was never really able to catch my attention that much. It doesn't feel as smooth as the other Mario platformers, and while I thought the idea was cool that you could go to levels in different orders, it led to the difficulty kind of being all over the place instead of being just a gradual curve. I still appreciate this game, I think it's definitely worth it for any Mario fan, but for me it's just gonna go at 20. If you're enjoying this video so far, and are looking forward to the Mario Galaxy movie, be sure to subscribe. Number 19, New Super Mario Bros. 2. So this game's entire identity is coins, and the fatal flaw of building a Mario game around coins is that coins have not mattered for a long time. They give you extra lives, and extra lives stopped being meaningful like 20 years before this game came out. So the central hook here, that enemies spray coins when you stomp them, the gold flower turns everything on screen into coins, there's a lifetime total counter in the corner tracking a number no one asked for, and it's built entirely around a resource that the series has pretty much made pointless for years. The coin loop seems interesting at first, chaining gold blocks, watching multiplier stack, numbers going up. It is kind of satisfying for like 5 minutes, but at no point does any of it change how you navigate a level. You're still doing the same left or right platforming over the same arrangements, past the same enemy types. The coins are just visual noise layered over a game that doesn't have enough going on underneath it to hold your attention. This game really did nothing to change the series, and it feels like a reskin of New Super Mario Bros. DS with coins. Now, the Impossible Back DLC is actually excellent and my favorite part of this game. With New Super Mario Bros. 2 being an extremely easy game, this is maybe the hardest challenge I've ever seen in any Mario game ever, if I'm being honest, and it is completely brutal. Definitely a good challenge to have in this game, but unfortunately if you did not buy it, you can't get it anymore. Number 18, Super Mario Bros. 2. So this is one of the strangest games on the list, and we all know why. YouTubers love bringing up the reason why, but of course it's much different than most other Mario games. Instead of just jumping on enemies, you jump on them but it doesn't defeat them, you have to throw them, or throw vegetables at them, and the levels are more vertical and more layered here, more so than a traditional 2D Mario game. Then bosses require you to catch projectiles and throw them back. None of that follows any Mario logic, and that by itself does not make this a bad game, I want to make that clear. But for me personally, I just typically prefer the traditional Mario formula better. So there are some things about this game that are actually really cool. So as we all know, there's the 4 character system with Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Toad. But unlike games that came out 20 years later, there's actually real differences here. All 4 characters have distinct play styles. Mario's balanced, Luigi has a higher floaty jump, Peach can hover a little bit, and in something like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, where you play as Mario, Luigi, or the 2 Toads, they all play the same. This game, of course, due to its origins, also has a very different cast, so it is nice to see some more variety. And I know Super Mario Land has variety too, but you can barely tell what these are. This is where we got the Shy Guy, Birdo, Ward, who's now appearing in the Super Mario Galaxy movie. The game also has some pretty stressful moments, like when you get a key and that face just starts chasing you. This is a fun game, it is creative. It's a much more slow and methodical game than typical 2D Mario games, and while I like that, like I mentioned, I usually prefer like the normal style of 2D Mario games. At number 17, here's a controversial one, Super Mario Bros. So ranking the original Super Mario Bros. At 17 is probably going to start some controversy, but like I mentioned, this list is just about what I personally enjoy rather than ranking them on any historical context, and separating those two things is harder than it sounds with this one. So I actually did grow up playing the NES and SNES games as a kid in the early 2000s, mostly through the GBA ports, even though I actually did have an NES with these games, so I don't need to go over all the details about it. We all know the details of the original Super Mario Bros. And how important it is, but instead of saying this game is important, therefore it's better, I like to acknowledge that this game started the entire series, the biggest video game franchise, the most well-known video game character ever. It created that formula, but if we actually compare it to most other games in the series, it is hard for me to rank it any higher. There's very little variety. The movement, while still fine, doesn't feel as good as later entries. You can't go backwards once you've already gotten past a screen, and there's only a handful of enemy types here. Pretty much after the first world or two, there's not really any new ideas tested. So now this is still a fun game, and it's actually impressive how well it aged considering it's 41 years old now. But I feel like a lot of arguments that have this really high are based on nostalgia, very specific personal preferences, or not separating the history from how the game actually feels to play. Number 16, New Super Mario Bros. U. So this game is fine. Controls are tight, level design is solid. The flying squirrel suit lets you glide and cling to walls, and every world theme shows up on schedule, whether it's grass, desert, ice, water, even though they do look a little different here. But the thing is, this came out the same year as New Super Mario Bros. 2. This was the 4th New Super Mario Bros. Game in 6 years, and people are just tired of the same basic formula by this point. Now this game is still fun. It has the same multiplayer. It has shinier HD graphics that look slightly better than the Wii version, but there's no novelty like the DS game bringing back 2D Mario, or the Wii version introducing multiplayer. And yeah, I know New Super Mario Bros. 2 has a novelty, but that doesn't really do anything for it. The closest thing to a novelty here is the flying squirrel suit, but that's just a power-up. This is just a very safe extension of existing mechanics rather than anything that opens up new thinking. The difficulty here is again pretty easy, and I feel like I can barely name a single level from this game, because it's just simply a fun game that doesn't try to do anything that interesting. interesting. Would have been a lot more fun if it actually changed things up a little bit. But I will say that New Super Luigi U is a much better game due to it just being much more difficult. Number 15, Super Mario 3D Land. So of course 3D Land is basically 2D Mario put in 3 dimensions. It has the same themes as something like a New Super Mario Bros. Has you start at point A and go to point B, and has all the traditional power-ups you'd expect, with the addition of the Tanuki suit coming back. So this plays nothing like Mario 64 or Sunshine, and really nothing like Galaxy also. And it does make sense because this was the first original 3D Mario game on a handheld, and the Tanuki suit really fits because you get a brief float after you jump, and it does smooth out small mistakes in a game designed for portability. Some levels also lean into the 3D perspective with the 3D effects that no one ever used. The game also has these weird sections where you're expected to put on the 3D effect, and let's be honest, none of us played on the 3DS with the 3D effect, or you know what, maybe like 3 of you who are commenting about it now did, but you kind of needed to not just guess with these perspectives. It's an interesting idea, but it's just kind of meh. What really hurts this game in comparison to its successor 3D World is that game takes the same structural idea of this, but just has so much more ambition, variety, creativity, and that makes sense because it's on the Wii U. But I feel like 3D Land very much feels like a handheld game, and it is, but with that being said, it makes it harder to compare to the home console games. The music here is also pretty weak in my opinion, not by itself, but just the original tracks here because there's so few. I also love to see unique levels and unique environments in 3D Mario games, and 3D Land doesn't really have any of that. It's basically New Super Mario Bros. 3D, and again, it's still a very good game, but it doesn't have the same grand 3D Mario effect. At number 14, I have New Super Mario Bros. DS. So this was one of the first games I ever played. Basically this and 64 DS were my introduction to gaming. I played this one constantly on car trips, at home, at boring events where I'd just be sitting down the whole time, and I played this game constantly, and even putting it this low is pretty difficult for me because I was going back and forth with this and the next one, but let's just focus on this for now. So the movement still holds up really well. Brought wall jumps, ground pounds, triple jumps from the 3D games into 2D space, and at the time, this was by far the most movement options you had in a 2D Mario game. You just have more ways to interact with the environment and recover from mistakes. There's the Mega Mushroom, which, if we're being honest, isn't that important. It shows up in like 3 levels, but it's still super fun to use. The levels themselves are mostly pretty simple, but I think honestly some of the best in the entire series. Like remember that one level where you go underground in this like maze, or pretty much all of World 8? This game also has some pretty creative bosses, and also this is my favorite soundtrack in the series because I love how the DS sound chip sounds. Now I know I said that Super Mario 3D Land just feels like a handheld game and it can't really compete with the home console games, but New Super Mario Bros. DS doesn't seem like it's being limited by anything. Sure, the graphics might be dated, but if you play this on the TV, it would feel right at home. Also, I gotta mention the multiplayer because even though it's pretty simple, it was a lot of fun. Now moving on to a game that is very close and I've gone back and forth on which is better. Number 13, New Super Mario Bros. Wii. So like I said, I've gone back and forth on which game I like better, and there are things I prefer about both. DS I think is the better single player game, Wii is the better multiplayer game, but one of my favorite things about this modern era of 2D Mario has been the multiplayer. Me and my brother finished this the day it came out, just sat there and played through the entire game. I'd go to friends' houses and we'd play through this game, and it was always fun to mess with people, like throw them into pits, or try to steal power-ups from them. And then of course being on a home console, that allows this game to just have bigger levels. I did say that DS would feel at home on a TV, but Wii just adds a lot more. Like this game is clearly built around multiplayer. It has the star coins to unlock new levels, so that gives you more secrets, and it has 2 of my favorite power-ups, the propeller mushroom and the penguin suit. I can pretty much say a lot of the same things about DS for Wii, but I simply just had more fun with this. The Bowser finale is also one of the best closing sequences in really any Mario game, and still stresses me out even though I almost never die on it at this point. At number 12 is Super Mario Bros. Wonder. So I actually thought about this moving down since I did replay it recently, but I decided not to. Wonder's the first 2D Mario in years that actually wanted to surprise me, and honestly by the time it came out that was most of the battle. After the 4 new Super Mario Bros. Games, and really that whole era of Mario where everything just felt so sanitized, just so boring, this was the first 2D Mario game in a long time to really change things up. The Wonder Flower is what drives most of that, because if you grab it, the level transforms in completely different ways every time. Some of these are just completely absurd. I mean, just look at this. Sometimes the whole level starts moving, platforms suddenly turn alive and rearrange. Sometimes you turn into something else, and you could say what you will about it. Maybe they're not all the best, but it is certainly creative. The badge system is smarter than it initially seems. Equipping something that changes your jump arc, gives you a wall run, actually can alter how you approach sections and change up strategies going into level, and it gives the game a lot of replay value, but these are pretty simple. You can play the entire game without badges and still be fine. However, where this game loses me is that it introduces so many good ideas, so many new enemies, but never really uses them long enough. Like a Wonder Flower might have a really cool idea, but that idea is only used one time. And I'm not saying that I want to be in every level, but I'd like to see some of these just used a little more. Same with enemies. series. There's also less bosses here, and none of them really stand out. And this is all stuff I really noticed on my replay. But perhaps the biggest thing for me personally, since I like to play these games multiplayer, is that unlike New Super Mario Bros. Wii or New Super Mario Bros. U, where it feels very easy to play multiplayer, it's fun to throw your friends around, you can't do that in this. You can't really interact with other players, and if someone goes too far ahead, which will happen very often, they have to be revived, and it just makes you have to play this game so much slower. And now another positive I don't think I mentioned in the last video, or at least positive for me, is I like seeing other players like as Ghost in the world or levels. Just something about the game just being more social. I think that was a really cool feature. But unlike games like New Super Mario Bros. DS and New Super Mario Bros. Wii, where I've replayed them countless times and still have a great time, I had a good time on my playthrough, but it definitely did fall off a lot from my first playthrough. Even with all those issues, this is such a creative game with so many new ideas and just so much more character than the New Super Mario Bros. Games that I decided to rank it higher. Number 11, Bowser's Fury. So Bowser's Fury is very fun, but it does start to show its limits. The concept is unlike anything in the series, with one fully connected world called Lake Lapcat, and it's islands you move between without loading screens or menus, just swimming and jumping and climbing through continuous spaces. You grab a cat shine on one island, spot something on the horizon, and then swim directly towards it. So it's technically an open world, but it also is very small. There's the Fury Bowser mechanic, which has the sky get dark as a warning, and then the water turns black, and then Fury Bowser erupts from the lake and starts covering the world in fire while you scramble for a Giga Bell and try to finish what you were doing before he arrived. Working under a building threat overhead is actually one of the best things about this game, even better than the open world in my opinion, and makes routine objectives have more urgency to them. The problem is the timing of his appearances occasionally go from dramatic into just being disruptive, just showing up in the middle of platformer or something, and I get the concept that can happen at any time, so it does make you feel stressed, but it also can be annoying. I know that may sound a little hypocritical. The cat shine system is where the cracks show most clearly. Similar objectives across different islands. Some are really great and some are just obvious padding, and you can feel exactly how the structure would fall apart at full game length, since this is a very short game. So this game is mostly a proof of concept for a game Nintendo hasn't made yet, which is a full open world Mario, and if they ever take this connected open world approach and build something full length around it, it could end up a lot higher than this. And even 11 I feel is really high for Bowser's Fury, but I really enjoyed the experience even though it was a very short game, and it's honestly something I could probably move down a little bit. This felt like a good spot on the list for it for now. Number 10, Super Mario 3D World. So this is kind of like the opposite of Wonder for me, because the first time I played 3D World, it didn't really do much for me. It felt like an extension of Super Mario 3D Land, which I liked, but also mentioned it just being very limited. It wasn't until years later when I went back to it and it actually clicked. It's not trying to be a big open Mario game, it's just trying to be something else entirely, and unlike 3D Land where it feels like it's just very limited, this game feels a lot more intentional. Now the levels are linear, there's clear objectives, compact challenges, but there's just so much more behind it. A lot of stages have specific ideas, like the one level where the fuzzies are rising and you have to climb up. The cat suit is a super fun power up, the clear pipes here are cool, and then there's of course the Captain Toad sections, which led to an entire game, and then the music here. I mean, this is the third best soundtrack in any Mario game. Galaxy games are better, but I love the jazzy big band feel of this, and some of my favorite tracks in the Mario series are in this game. Check out this video if you want to see what my favorite song in this game is. But anyway, back to the gameplay itself. So like I mentioned, the cat suit being a fun power-up, it feels a lot more integrated into this game than the Tanuki suit in 3D Land, if that makes sense. Like, this game has a lot more verticality, so being able to climb does help you out. This was the first 3D Mario game to really have co-op play, not counting the cursor thing in the Galaxy games, and it works really well here. The levels sometimes feel like playgrounds, where different players can go around and do different things. And a big issue I had with 3D Land was that it just felt very bland at times, like it didn't really have its own unique identity, but 3D World absolutely does. Sure, it has some of the more traditional New Super Mario Bros. Level themes, but they at least feel a lot different here. Like World 8 Bowser, the Carnival, it was one of my favorite worlds in any Mario game, for example. And then of course there's the Switch version of this game, which takes a movement from the original, which was a little slow and didn't feel the best, pretty much perfects that. Number 9, Super Mario Sunshine. One of the most divisive games in the series, and admittedly it is a very messy game, but I still love it. FLUDD changes everything about how movement works. The hover nozzle extends your jump and lets you steer your descent, and you're not just committing to a jump and hoping, but you could actually do more in the air, but you actually have a lot more options here. Once that becomes an instinct, the game opens up considerably. There's other nozzles like the rocket nozzle, which fires you straight up into places the level seems surprised you found. The turbo nozzle makes Mario fast enough that running across Delfino Plaza actually starts feeling like a Sonic game, and this is coming off Super Mario 64, which pioneered the 3D platformer, so changing it up once again is something to give it credit for. So this game takes place in Isla Delfino, and it's a lot different than the hub world in Mario 64, which is the castle, because this is a whole city with different buildings, a whole lot of NPCs, and full-on cutscenes. You can even see some of the different levels from Delfino Plaza, and I found that to be really cool. Compare that to Mario 64, the music is great here, it has that tropical feel, and some levels here are really unique, like you have a theme park, a casino, a beach, another beach. Not all of the levels are greatly designed, so there's some that are very difficult without FLUDD, which are the secret courses, and I actually really love these, but then there's some that are not great. There's the pachinko machine, the lily pad, and these just suck if I'm being honest. Like the pachinko machine feels like complete RNG, and the lily pad just has the camera battling you. Now these levels are rough, and they they were rough when this game came out, and it's hard to defend them, but a game willing to take this many creative risks is going to fall on its face occasionally, and I do find that more interesting than something that's just way too cautious. And I genuinely do like using Flood here. I think it's a fun mechanic, and I like the tropical theme. Now, do I prefer having more varied environments? Yes, but I prefer something like this over something that just feels sanitized. And I will say that the blue coins are pretty annoying in this game, but overall I had a great time playing this, and if you could get past some of its quirks, it is in my opinion a top 10 mainline Mario game. So at number 8, this one really isn't a Mario game, but I wanted to include it, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. And as you can see, I love it better than the majority of mainline Mario games, and while this game doesn't need to be on the list, I just wanted to talk about it anyway. It doesn't scratch the same itch as a traditional Mario game, because of course here you play as Yoshi, so you get that flutter jump, you have the ability to throw eggs. It's a much slower game, but it has a very different vibe. It has more of a storybook vibe, it has one of my favorite soundtracks ever, and of course being what is pretty much a new series, there's a lot of creative ideas tested out here, a lot of brand new things, some of which include Baby Mario crying. The egg system is where most of the interesting gameplay lives. You eat enemies with Yoshi's tongue, convert them into eggs, store up to 6, and then aim and throw at targets. Switches, enemies, floating clouds that might hold something. Ricocheting an egg off a wall to hit a switch behind a barrier you can't reach directly. This is the kind of problem the game builds entire sections around, and finding the right angle has a puzzle-solving quality that pure platformers usually don't have. The Baby Mario system changes how failure works, and I have mixed feelings about it. Getting hit sends Baby Mario floating off in a bubble with a countdown, and you can recover him before you lose a life, which keeps the stakes lower and makes the game more forgiving. Problem is that the times that feel best in Mario games are usually faster paced, and of course Yoshi's Island softens that by design. It is just a more methodical game, but even with all of that, this is just such a fantastically designed game, and the whole vibe of it is one of my favorite parts. It's also just very varied, with some light Metroidvania elements in some stages, needing to find keys, some mini games, and the different effects here. I still really like the Yoshi series, but I don't think any game has come close to this. Also, I just want to point out that I know someone's going to say if I'm including this, I should have Super Mario Land 3, which really isn't a Mario game, and yeah, that's probably true. It's not my favorite game, so I'd probably have it around Super Mario Land 2 anyway. Number 7, Super Mario Bros. 3. So I consider this to be an almost perfect video game. It took the original Super Mario Bros. And then did something completely different. It's less linear with a world map and some mini games here to add some content. You could actually go backwards here. There's more power-ups, more enemies, more level themes, more ideas. Literally just took every single thing that the first game did great and just did it even better here. Better music, better presentation, better platforming, and still holds up all these years later. Some of my favorite power-ups are the Tanuki suit, the frog suit, and the hammer suit. And while we've of course gotten the Tanuki suit back, I want to see the frog suit and hammer suit back. Like, where are these? Anyway, going back to the world map, it restructures the entire experience in a way no Mario game before had tried. You're navigating a space with paths, choices, toad houses, and actual inventory to manage. There's items here you can get to skip parts of this game, which feels a lot more rewarding than just finding the warp pipes in Super Mario Bros. Then the level variety here is the most we'd seen at that point in a 2D Mario game, and it still holds up really well. There's auto-scrolling airships, there's vertical giant worlds, there's more puzzle-like underground sections, and it never gets boring here. All the worlds in this feel completely different, and unlike the original where you've pretty much seen everything after the first world, you have to play this entire game to really understand everything. Like I mentioned, the platforming is also a lot more precise here. This is a difficult game, but it doesn't feel unfair, especially if you're playing with save systems on NSO or anything like that, because that was my biggest critique of the original, where there was no save system. So when I played this on an original NES, I was never actually able to get through the whole game, but that's pretty much a non-issue nowadays. This game is kind of hard to just describe as why it's so great. It's one of those games you really just have to play to get an understanding of how good the platforming feels here. This game is also what introduced most of the Mario themes we know, like the grasslands, the deserts, the snow themes, the cloud themes, and yeah, some of these were in the original Super Mario Bros, but you could barely tell. Then the sheer content here, which still doesn't feel bloated. This would be my favorite 2D Mario game if it wasn't for the next game on the list, because at number 6, we have Super Mario World. Remember how I was saying how Super Mario Bros. 3 took everything from the original and made it better? Well, Super Mario World took everything from Super Mario Bros. 3 and made that better. Took advantage of the jump from 8-bit to 16-bit graphics and has visuals that still hold up today. Introduces new movement options like the spin jump, and overall just feels better to play. I think this is one of the best 2D platformers of all time. You have smooth acceleration and deceleration with level design that really lets you test all of that out. This game also introduced Yoshi, who completely changes everything. You could use him to eat enemies to get an extra jump. You have more power-ups here like the cape, which is this game's flying power-up, and it is a little harder to use than something like the Tanuki suit. It has a world map that's a lot more in-depth than Super Mario Bros. 3. Has a great difficulty curve, but in my opinion, one of the best things about this game are the secrets. With all the different paths, secret exits, secret worlds at the end of the game, there's so much content here. You could play this for hours upon hours and still not discover everything. And then in the special zone, which most players don't even unlock, there's some of the hardest levels in the Mario series that have very 80s names. When I play a video game, especially a platformer, The goal of the game is just to have fun, and this is just a fun game with no padding, very few annoyances, and no real issues I can think of. And of course the music here, I mean, it's the same for most Mario games, but it's just so good here. Number 5, Super Mario 64. So this is still one of the most satisfying games just to move around in, which is the thing that keeps it relevant long after its age has become hard to ignore. The second you start chaining long jumps into dives, into wall kicks, you feel how much intention went into these physics. Mario has weight and real momentum, and learning to work with that rather against it is the skill the game is quietly teaching you across its entire length. You can get through with basic jumps, but once you start using more advanced mechanics, it just feels a lot better to play. There's a reason people still play this even though there's games like Mario Odyssey that have technically more complex movement mechanics, because it just feels very specific here. The levels here are also spaces rather than stages. Bob-omb Battlefield, Whomp's Fortress, Tall Tall Mountain. You find these by jumping into a painting, and fun fact, I had no idea that's actually how you're supposed to get into the levels when I first started playing this. I randomly just jumped at a painting and found out. But anyway, that openness is what makes it feel like a sandbox, because you're able to take some shortcuts. You're able to find stars that you didn't initially go there for. You're able to find details that someone who doesn't wander off the beaten path won't find. And every single level tries something different. Bob-omb Battlefield has you climbing up to face King Bob-omb. Tick-Tock Clock has you literally going into a clock and climbing through gears and hands. Big Boo Hunt has you wandering around this spooky mansion and then finding a secret part in the basement. It has some of the best levels in the series, but the game does show its age. The camera is very dated. Like, sometimes you will miss a jump because the camera looks somewhere unhelpful, and it is a frustration that later games did address. The movement is less forgiving here, but that also can be seen as a positive for a lot of people, but for me it definitely can be hard to defend sometimes, just because games that have come out later have objectively better movesets. But even besides any gameplay mechanic, there's just something about this game. There's something about the peacefulness of the courtyard, the mysterious backgrounds of the levels that make it seem like a liminal space, unnerving feeling, especially when you're in the basement. It's something that I feel like hasn't been replicated in a Mario game since, and it's one of the things that just kept me coming back to this game. Number 4, Super Mario 64 DS. So this is a very controversial opinion, and I know that. The controls are worse here. Going from an analog stick to a D-pad loses the fine-grained movement adjustments that made 64 feel fluid, and anyone coming from the original is going to spend the first hour feeling like they're fighting the input, and maybe the entire game if I'm being honest. But 64 DS was one of the first games I ever played. I came to this version before I knew there was another one to compare it to, so there was no adjustment period because I didn't know anything needing adjusting. By the time I played the N64 version, it felt like the weird one, but once you're past the controls, what the game adds starts mattering a lot more than what you take away. The character system isn't super intuitive, but it is fun. Starting as Yoshi completely changes the feel of the opening levels. He can't punch, he interacts with enemies differently, and his floatier jump changes the basic platforming. When you bring Mario, Luigi, and even Wario into the picture, each has a toolkit that matters for specific situations. Luigi's invisible flower lets you reach certain parts that you wouldn't be able to get to otherwise. Wario's weight breaks objects and accesses areas the others physically can't, and his slower movement changes the feel of precision sections. The added stars, reworked objectives, new levels, and new character-specific missions give you reasons to engage with familiar levels differently. It feels like a more complete version of the game, and the one thing holding it back are the controls. Now, if you play this on a 3DS, it feels better, but it's not perfect, and I totally understand having 64 higher, but again, this is just my own personal preference, you don't have to agree. Number 3, Super Mario Odyssey. Odyssey is what Mario 64 was trying to become, with over 20 years refinement behind it, and the distance between them is enormous. The moveset is the most expressive in the series: dives, rolls, cap throws, midair bounces off cappy, roll, cancel vectoring, and the game teaches you maybe 40% of what's possible, leaving the rest for you to find through experimentation. The gap between how a new player moves and how someone who's put real time into it moves is as wide as anything in the series, and that can coexist with a game that anyone can finish. Cappy is what makes the whole system work. Throwing him midair gives you an extra action that opens up sequences that look impossible until you understand the timing. Like, there's some crazy movement options here that have led to quote-unquote impossible challenges. The capture mechanic adds a completely different layer on top, becoming a bullet bill and flying across a gap. Stomping through a section as a T-Rex is something I never expected from a Mario game. Using a Goomba stacks movement to reach certain areas, something normal Mario can never do. And I don't know who came up with this idea, but credit them, because this is one of the most creative things I've ever seen in a video game. And of course, before this, 3D Mario games were becoming more linear, with the Galaxy games, with the 3D games, but then this changes everything. It has these big open kingdoms, well, for the most part, some of them barely have anything, but you have a bunch of different moons to find, a bunch of different purple coins which let you unlock different outfits, and just a ton of extra content. There's a ridiculous amount of moons. Now, this also is where Odyssey loses some ground, because the moons here are not all created equal. In Mario 64, getting a star usually means you work that entire level to get that star. It feels more rewarding, but in Odyssey you might collect 5 moons before even touching the ground. Now, some of these are rewarding, but some of them are literally just ground pounding in the right place. So I will say that 64 is much more rewarding at points, and I actually have had 64 higher. I think it's incredibly close, but the sheer amount of content in Mario Odyssey makes up for it. You could tell how much love was put into this game, like with the 2D sections, with the post-game content that has one of the hardest levels in a Mario game. Like, this really feels like a love letter to old Mario games, especially with New Donk City and the whole performance there. Now, a lot of people don't like Odyssey because it is a little more of a collectathon, on, but I don't mind that from a 3D platformer. And number 2, Super Mario Galaxy 2. So I'll say this first, Galaxy 2 might be the better game in a lot of ways. Not in the way that people say things like that to seem balanced, but in the actual level by level sense, where if you sat down and went through both of them honestly, Galaxy 2 probably has some of the better levels. The levels are tighter, the ideas come faster, and there's almost no point across the entire game where you feel like you're waiting for something interesting to happen. You just load in, something good starts immediately, and that pretty much repeats throughout the entire game. So I was there day one for this game. It was one of the first games I got on launch day, and I pretty much just played through it quickly. It's simply just a great game from the first level, and takes what is almost a perfect game and just expands on it in a lot of ways. There's Yoshi levels here, which are inventive. Of course, you have his flutter jump, you use him for projectiles. There's even these sprinting parts of the game. The Cloud Flower is another fun one. Gives you 3 platforms that you can spawn in midair and demand, and some sections of the game are built on this. The levels here are a lot bigger for the most part. Like where Galaxy feels a lot more linear, Galaxy 2 feels a little grander and even has some more ideas. So why is it second? There's a few reasons. So yes, the levels are faster paced here, the levels are bigger, but it feels like it's just going at a much faster pace and doesn't really give you time to breathe. Like Mario Galaxy has a lot of those levels, but then it might put a level in between that feels a lot different to kind of just slow it down a little bit. And then the hub world, Starship Mario is nothing compared to the Comet Observatory. I just felt a lot different unlocking different areas in Galaxy compared to unlocking different worlds in Galaxy 2. Another thing I really like is the story in Galaxy. Something not expected in a Mario game, and it's not something you even have to engage with. You can completely skip the library sections if you want, but it's just very somber, it's very emotional. And then the whole ending of this game is probably the second most emotional moment in a Mario game, and Galaxy 2 doesn't really have that. It feels great to play, it has great level design, but it's just missing something about the original, which is why at number 1, my favorite game of all time, Super Mario Galaxy. So I got a Wii in 2008 and I got Galaxy with it. I was just 5 years old, and I don't have a ton of clear memories from being 5, but I still have the memories of when I first played Galaxy. Using the Wiimote to collect star bits was extremely satisfying and still is even on the Switch version. And of course Galaxy 2 does the same thing, but to reiterate on things I like better about Galaxy 1 is that it gives you more moments to breathe. You might go from a fast-paced Galaxy to a much slower paced one. Like the game isn't trying to be as bombastic, it's not trying to be as over the top, and it just has that very different vibe that I really appreciate. A lot of what I'm going to say here works for Galaxy 2 also, and they are very close for me, but I didn't want to just talk about the same thing for both games. But of course, the gravity mechanics makes everything possible here and completely changes what we know about Mario platforming. When you're on small planetoid surfaces and you do a long jump, for example, the gravity affects that. Sometimes the gravity completely shifts, and then some levels play more like traditional Mario levels, and I think that's a good mix to have. The music is great in both games, can't go wrong with either one, but something like Gusty Garden Galaxy is one of the grandest songs we ever got in a video game. The piano version of Comet Observatory is one of my favorite video game tracks ever, just because I love how somber it is, how it takes an already great theme and just slows it down a little bit. And I think Galaxy 1 has some of the higher highs with the galaxies, like Toy Time Galaxy is one of my favorites, Gusty Garden Galaxy, and the final level. And to reiterate on more points that I mentioned with Galaxy 2, the Comet Observatory actually feels lived in, and you hear more instruments being added to the song that plays. As time goes on, you see it start to light up, you unlock these new areas, and it just makes the game feel more alive compared to unlocking new galaxies on a world map. There's something very special about this game that's really hard to quantify. I actually went back and played both these on the Switch too, and while the game looks a little better, it didn't really change much from the original because these games have aged so perfectly and set out to be exactly what they want to be. There's no padding here, and really no big flaws I can think of, and there's a reason these are my 2 favorite games of all time, with Galaxy 1 being my favorite game of all time. And that's my list. That's every main series Mario game ranked in my own personal opinion. If you disagreed, which you probably did, don't take it personally, the same way you might say I'm wrong for liking a game, someone else could say you're wrong. And video games are personal experiences. Enjoy what you want to enjoy, don't let my opinion shift yours. I'm just talking about a series that means a lot to me. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to like and subscribe. I have a ton of other Mario videos, a ton of other Nintendo videos, so there's going to be something here you'll enjoy if you made it to the end of this video. Also consider joining my Discord. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.